I first saw it on a dusty, out-of-the-way shelf in the supermarket. The one marked local flavor. Apart from a couple jars of murky, expensive honey and somebody's grandmother's homemade barbecue sauce, there usually wasn't much there. But that afternoon, something special caught my eye. It was the wrapping that stood out to me. It had this purplish blue color that reminded me of hope. It was like the clear morning sky on the first day of school, or the surface of a deep, refreshing lake just before you dive in. Sounds crazy, I know. And yet, before I knew what I was doing, I was already walking towards that forgotten set of shelves. I didn't even know what was inside the packaging yet, only that I had to try it. Whatever it was, there was only one left. I was halfway down the bread aisle when an older guy in a business suit came barreling past me, grabbed it, and headed straight for the checkout. I was disappointed, but I still wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The empty cardboard display was the same color the wrapping had been. River Downs Chocolate Company, it read, in fancy gold lettering. Such a shame. They've sold out again. The sudden, wispy voice made me jump, but it was just an elderly woman leaning on her walker behind me. It's the best stuff, she went on. They make it at the old Pelsky refrigeration plant, you know? In the River Downs. They keep it running all day and night. That's brave of them, I laughed. The River Downs was an old manufacturing district in my hometown, built atop a low, marshy bend in the river. Even back when business was booming, the place was humid, foul-smelling, and flooded almost every year. After the factory shut down, addicts and rats moved in. But they didn't last long. As far as I knew, the only things living down there were lost tourists and mosquitoes. Have you tried it? The old woman asked. There was an eagerness, a hunger in her beady eyes that I didn't like at all. Would you happen to know where I could get some? I shook my head and backed away. Such a shame, she repeated, and shook her head. That ravenous look faded from her face. She seemed like just an ordinary senior citizen once again. My father worked at that plant, you know? Kept a family of 4 fed on one salary. I had enough left over for a bass boat. Can you imagine? Times certainly had changed, I agreed, and turned to go. As I did, the old woman grabbed my sleeve with a shaking, claw-like hand and pressed something into my palm. A wrinkled scrap of paper featuring her name, phone number, and address. If you find any more of it, let me know, won't you? You can recognize it by the yellow packaging. Bright, buttery yellow, just like the dandelions in my garden. Okay, I will. Ethel? I replied, reading her name from the paper. She clearly wasn't well. Who the hell mixes up yellow and purple? Ethel let go of me, satisfied, and went about her shopping as though our strange conversation had never taken place. I, on the other hand, found that I couldn't concentrate. Why on earth would anybody reopen some plant in the River Downs? And what was so damn special about the product they made there? When I got home, I discovered that I had forgotten about half the things on my list. It was a Sunday evening, too late to go out again, and I had to work in the morning. As it often did, the irritation made me crave a snack. Something sweet. What I really needed, I realized, was chocolate. The thought sent a shiver up my spine. I wasn't sure where the idea had come from, but once it had wormed its way into my mind, all I could think of was that purplish blue display box and the delicious treasure waiting within. I could see it as clearly as if I was standing right in front of it, and I resolved to swing by the supermarket the next morning, as soon as they opened. If the timing worked out just right, I might even make it to work on time. I woke up at 5 and, unable to get back to sleep, left for my destination early. My car was the only one in the supermarket parking lot on that misty Monday morning. The store wasn't technically open yet, but the lights were on and the doors were unlocked. Most of the staff, it seemed, were still busy stocking the shelves. A bald, mustached manager was standing in front of the local flavor display, his arms folded over his tie. "I don't want any more incidents like what happened last week," he was saying. "If anybody else is caught taking this stuff before the customers have a chance to buy it, they're fired on the spot. No questions asked. Are we clear?" The 5 glum-looking workers in front of him nodded, and I could tell that at least one of them was already itching to get his hands on some Riverdam's chocolate. After the manager and his companions walked away, he stayed behind, obviously considering which he valued more, his source of income or one of those cheerfully wrapped bars. In the end, self-control won out, and he slunk back morosely to his workstation. I was more determined than ever to try one for myself, but a commotion from the front door made me turn my head. The man in the suit, the elderly woman, and several dozen others were hurrying through the doors, moving toward the Riverdam's chocolate display with as much speed as dignity would allow. A guy in a mechanic jumpsuit finally set aside pretense and made a run for it. A heavily pregnant woman followed suit. Both of them were outpaced by the businessman, who snatched up a chocolate bar and sprinted for the registers. It was strange, I thought, that as eager as everyone was for the stuff, nobody took more than one bar. Maybe a little went a long way. As long as there were still bars in the boxes, people didn't do much more than push and grab. The fighting only started after the last bar was taken. I didn't think the pregnant woman stood a chance, until she bit down on the hand of a hotel clerk whose name tag read Sebastian, ripped the chocolate from his grasp, and charged out the service door with an inhuman shriek. Sebastian fell backwards, skidding over the tile until he stopped just a few feet away from me. As he pushed himself back to his feet, I would have sworn I saw something squirming beneath the surface of his skin. The manager and a security guard came running over, waving their hands, but by then the scuffle had already ended. Everyone who could grab a bar had done so, and everyone who couldn't had retreated, licking their wounds to the exits. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The words were spoken by a guy with a ponytail leaning on his mop at the end of the next aisle. He looked over at me and smirked. "Do you have any idea how long it's going to take to clean this all up? It's like this every morning, you know? Maybe tomorrow somebody will bring a machete." What's a custodian doing quoting Yeats? I raised an eyebrow. "That's Dr. Custodian to you, pal. I spent 12 years studying literature. It's a good thing I did, too. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get a dream job like this." He held out a greasy hand. "Bryce Corvin, at your service." I shook and introduced myself in return. "You haven't eaten any of that stuff, have you?" Dr. Bryce went on. "No, of course you haven't. I can see it in your eyes. Let me ask you something. What color do you think that display case is? Because to me, it looks ruby red. It's plump and delicious as a cherry in one of my grandmother's famous pies. But the store manager says it reminds him of a fluffy white cloud." I told him what I saw and wondered aloud what he thought it meant. "I don't know," Bryce shrugged. "But I will say this. Ever since I wound up back in this nothing burger town, I've been wishing for something big to happen. Something life-changing. World-changing, even. Now, though, I take it all back." Bryce turned his back to me, whistling as he moved his mop back and forth across the blood-smeared tile floor. I checked my watch and my heart skipped a beat. I was already 10 minutes late for work. I managed to talk my way out of being fired, but I was on thin ice with the owner of the small print shop where I worked, and I knew it. I stayed late to make up for the lost time, and by the time I left, it was already dark. The correct and responsible thing to do would have been to go home, eat a healthy dinner while I watched the series on my streaming service, and be in bed by 10 o'clock. Instead, I found myself driving across town to the River Downs. "They keep it running all day and night," Ethel had said. I meant to find out whether she was telling the truth. I had forgotten how creepy the River Downs could be, especially after dark. All those ruined factories, their shattered windows staring like empty eye sockets, their crumbling walls painted over with generations of graffiti. Dead weeds sprouted from cracks in the sidewalk, and only about half of the streetlights still worked. Between the poor visibility and my own shoddy navigation skills, I quickly became lost. Lost in a way that not even GPS could fix. Alleys in the River Downs were so narrow that mapping services usually returned the wrong street, or even the wrong block. At least the River Downs Chocolate Company was easy to find. It was the only building that still had any lights on. Whoever had purchased the building had kept its derelict 50s-era factory look for aesthetic reasons, I figured, but had redone the loading dock and beefed up security. There was an electronic gate, cameras, and I thought I even spotted the shadowy shapes of guards on the factory roof. It's a lot of trouble to go through for a few bars of chocolate. A pair of trucks idled on the left side of the building. I couldn't get much of a look at the dark figures that were loading them. They were backlit by the factory's lights and dressed head to toe in black rubber suits. A sort of sinister version of the outfits worn by hazmat crews. I was wondering who the workers were, and how much they might know about what went on inside the factory, when a flashlight rapped against my window. One of those dark-suited figures glared down at me. Even up close, I couldn't see anything behind their black rubber mask. They waved me down the road, as if to say, "This is private property. You've got no business here. Move along." I took one look at the nightstick, handcuffs, and pistol on the figure's utility belt, and complied. In my rearview mirror, I could see them watching me go. They didn't return to the factory gate until I was rounding the corner. I dreamt of chocolate that night. I was walking alone into the empty, brightly lit supermarket. The River Downs Chocolate Company display was fully stocked. And this time, there were no crowds or frowning managers to stand in my way. It was all mine. I didn't wait until checkout. I reached right down and peeled back the purplish-blue wrapping of the first bar I saw. Whatever was inside felt gooey beneath my fingers. Had it melted in transit or something? A viscous black ooze flowed. No, squirmed out of the opening of the wrapper. It slithered across my hand and burrowed into the tender flesh of my arm. I screamed, jumped backwards, and looked down in horror at the affected arm. There was no bleeding wound, no pain. It looked fine. I cautiously poked my wrist, then recoiled in horror. The texture was spongy and wrong, and that wasn't all. As my fingers approached, hundreds of tiny white worms poked hungrily out of my skin. They were spreading inside of me. I couldn't feel a thing, but I knew it to be true. "It's too late for you," Dr. Bryce commented, a sad smile on his face. He was spreading more of that black goo across the floor with his mop. "It's too late for all of us." He bent double and vomited a stream of ichor at my feet. The worms squirming inside of it all lifted their heads toward me, with an awful, inhuman intelligence. I woke up screaming. No matter how much I washed my hands and forearms, I couldn't get rid of that sticky sensation that the dream had left me with. I looked down at the sink and realized that the water was tinged pink. I had scrubbed so hard that I was bleeding. I was relieved, at least, that I didn't see any tiny white worms writhing on their way down the drain. It took me forever to fall back asleep. And when I woke up for the second time, the sun was high in the sky and the birds were chirping. I had missed my alarm. But what upset me the most wasn't being late for work 2 days in a row. It was realizing that I had missed the morning rush for Riverdow's chocolate. Knowing that a half hour, more or less, wasn't going to make any difference in my boss's mood, I swung by the supermarket. Just in case, I told myself. Of course, the shelf was empty. I did, however, spot Dr. Bryce wiping down the deli display window. "Looks like you missed your chance again, huh?" he commented sarcastically. "Maybe it's for the best," I sighed. I can't tell whether it's really me who wants those things. Know what I mean? "I can tell you one thing for sure." Bryce nodded thoughtfully. "I've had my eye on that shelf for a while now, and nobody ever comes back a third time. The businesswoman and the pregnant woman from yesterday, even that old lady with the walker. None of them have been in since yesterday. Man, they're just the most recent ones. I bet if anybody took a drive around town and paid real close attention, they'd notice a lot more apartments for rent, a lot more shuttered houses, cars left to rot on the side of the road. But hey, what do I know? Just the guy who wipes down the deli." That old lady with the walker. He was talking about Ethel. "I think I've got that woman's address," I said. Bryce checked his watch. "My shift ends in 15 minutes. What do you say we pop over there and do a little welfare check?" I like the idea, but I've got to take care of something first. "Yeah, what?" was the print shop owner's harsh answer when he picked up my call. I couldn't blame him for being angry. I'd left him in the lurch for 2 days running. I decided that I was going to tell him I needed a few days to sort out a personal problem. I'd been with the shop for 2 years now, and if he wanted to fire me over that, then so be it. "Hey, I'm sorry about yesterday and this morning," I began. "Whatever, it's fine," he cut me off, then added, "Hey, do you know where I can find any of those Riverdow's chocolates?" I hung up. My hands were shaking. Bryce Corvin lifted an eyebrow. "See you in the parking lot," I said. Ethel Haynes lived in a forgotten Cold War-era suburb on the north side of town. Most of the original owners had moved out or died, and the people who'd replaced them weren't exactly big on lawn care and home maintenance. There were a lot of cars on blocks in the front yards, a lot of windows blacked out with trash bags. It was obvious which house was Ethel's. It was the only one that still had a garden, although it looked like it hadn't been weeded in some time. I parked across the street and killed the engine. There was a stillness, a quietness to the house that I didn't like at all. "Should I knock?" I asked, but Bryce was already circling around to the backyard, clearly convinced that there was nothing alive inside. Still, that didn't mean the place was empty. I was sure that a shadow moved behind the curtains as I approached the door. My heart was in my throat as I rang the bell. A minute passed, then 2. No one was going to answer, I thought, and felt like I could breathe again. Then the door swung open. "Nobody's here," Bryce announced. "Come see for yourself." The doors had been left unlocked. There was a pot of spoiled soup on the stove and dishes in the sink, as though Ethel had just walked off and left it all behind. I looked around the kitchen and scratched my head. "Did you check upstairs too?" I ventured. Bryce nodded. "What about the basement?" Bryce's eyes widened. Next to him was a cracked open door that he seemed to have overlooked. It wavered slightly on its hinges, as though the dark space on the other side was somehow breathing. Bryce nudged it the rest of the way open with a broom. To my surprise, no rotten hand or inky black tendril reached out to snap it in half. What waited on the other side was just a typical grandmother's basement. dusty fruit preserves on wooden shelves, drying herbs dangling from the ceiling, rusty shears, and old sewing equipment lining the bare concrete walls. The only difference was that here, the lights were out. Permanently. It looked like something had shattered the bulb, and there was this smell, like a mix of stagnant water and industrial waste. It reminded me of the river downs. Bryce was brave enough to descend a few steps, grab a cobwebby plastic flashlight, and smack it until it flickered on. Its faint yellow beam was almost worse than the dark, and it felt like it could go out at any time. He started down the stairs, and, against my better judgment, I followed him. We had almost reached the musty dirt floor of the cellar when I realized that something was moving just beyond the reach of the light. "Ethel?" I called out in a tiny voice that the darkness seemed to swallow up. "We met the other day in the supermarket. We're here to check up on you. Are you alright?" Whatever was lurking in the shadows skittered up the wall like a spider, except that it was human-sized. Just about the size, in fact, that Ethel had been. The old woman, however, could never have moved that fast, nor did she have quite so many limbs. I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at, but I was already sprinting up the stairs, and Bryce was right behind me. It was time to go to the authorities. I would leave out any mention of my late-night drive to the River Downs, and my not-quite-legal entry into Ethel's home. Instead, I would focus on the unhealthy effect that River Downs chocolate seemed to be having on so many local people. Such a wild-sounding theory would need support, but Bryce was reluctant. Simply put, he didn't think the police could be trusted with something this big. When I asked if he had any better ideas, however, he sighed and followed me to the station. To my surprise, I recognized the officer on duty, Josh Harper. The last time I'd seen him, however, he hadn't been sitting bored behind a desk in a starch blue uniform. He'd been doing cake stands in his boxers at a high school field party. "Oh, hey Josh, Officer Harper?" I began. Josh's hazel eyes narrowed. I wasn't getting off to a good start. By the time I'd finished my tale, I half expected him to throw Bryce and I out of the station, or submit us to some kind of drug test. Instead, he sighed, stood from his office chair, and beckoned us deeper into the station with a reluctant, "Follow me, please." Bryce caught my eye. I could tell he didn't want to pass through that automatically sealing door. But if he didn't come along to support my testimony, what chance did I have? We were already being taken to see Officer Harper's superiors, after all. Wasn't that a good sign? My old high school classmate asked if we wanted any water, then sat us down in two separate interrogation rooms at the end of the cinderblock hallway. There were no windows, but I was relieved to see that he left the door open behind him when he left. I sat in the sparsely furnished space, second-guessing myself and wondering whether Bryce had been right after all, for what felt like half an hour. Then a heavy-set officer with a comb-over lumbered into the room. A slim, plainclothes detective followed him. They closed the door behind him. "We hear you've noticed something odd about Riverdow's chocolate," the detective said. The bigger man nodded along, as though the pair of them were a part of some comedy act. Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I launched into my story again, but the detective held up a hand. "It's clear that there's a problem here," he grimaced. The larger officer, I noticed uncomfortably, was circling around behind me. "But the problem isn't the Riverdow's Chocolate Company. It's you. It's the things you're noticing. Fortunately, I've got your remedy right here." The detective reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar-looking purplish-blue chocolate bar. "Simmons, hold him still, and open his mouth." I couldn't believe this was happening. These men were police officers, weren't they? As the detective came closer, I would have sworn I could see squirming beneath his skin, just like that man in the supermarket. There wasn't any time to wonder about what that might mean. The big man, Simmons, was already gripping my arms. The detective unwrapped the bar and broke off a square of chocolate. It looked ordinary. Not at all like the black goo from my dreams. But I knew that its contents were just as sinister. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. My kicking, screaming, and struggling. The detective moving the square of chocolate towards my mouth. Simmons gripping my jaw in place and pinching my nose shut until I had to gasp for air. Then came a knock at the door. "Everything okay in there?" Officer Josh Harper asked. The distraction gave me time to suck in air, scream again, and shut my mouth. The two men cursed. Josh used his key to enter the interrogation room. What the... Simmons had dropped me as the door opened. The detective slipped the chocolate bar back inside his pocket, but I wasn't going to wait around for whatever happened next. I slipped past my shocked ex-classmate and dashed down the hall, ignoring his commands to stop. I slammed the buzzer that unlocked the station door and continued into the parking lot. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice before I managed to open the door of my car. I was sure that that delay would seal my fate. But no one came charging up behind me to drag me back into the station. At the time, I didn't understand why. I was just grateful to have escaped. I drove aimlessly, my heart racing. My mind was made up. I had to get out of town fast. It was dusk by the time I got back to my neighborhood. Unsure of whether or not my house was under surveillance, I circled around a few blocks and traveled the rest of the distance on foot. I was only one street away when I noticed someone standing beneath the street lamp across from my house. As the street lights flickered on, I realized that it was Ethel, looking no different than she had in the supermarket. She didn't seem to need her walker now, however. And when she saw me, she smiled. She wasn't alone. More familiar faces were approaching from the surrounding streets. Dr. Bryce, my boss at the print shop, Officer Simmons, and the plainclothes detective. They had always intended to follow me after I left the station. They had just been waiting for the dark. Was that the reason that the Riverdowns Chocolate Company had to load its trucks after nightfall? The reason that no one was seen again after eating their third bar? Did whatever transformation the stuff caused make it impossible to go out during daylight? I didn't have time to wonder. Ditching my plan to grab whatever I could carry from my house, I bolted for my car. And then, the things that used to be my friends and neighbors gave chase. My shoes hammered against the sidewalk. Sweat pooled on my chest, and they were still gaining ground. I glanced over my shoulder, and what I saw turned my stomach. Those things weren't sprinting like I was. They were scrambling on all fours, their arms and hands flailing like they'd never heard of pain. My car was only 2 blocks away. The fog on the windshield shone golden in the streetlights, like some treasure that I would never reach. I wasn't gonna make it. They were just too fast. I could already imagine the spongy, inhuman feel of their skin as they tackled me, and the last breath I would take as myself before they force-fed me a piece of Riverdowns chocolate. A siren wailed. Flashing red and blue lights pulled up beside me. "Get in," Officer Harper yelled out the window. He didn't have to tell me twice. In the rearview mirror, over a dozen silhouettes stood in the street, observing us. "My bosses have been acting weird since last Sunday," Josh explained. "Locking themselves in their offices, only coming in at night. When they wanted to interrogate you after that wacky story you told, I knew that something was up." While Josh talked, I looked out the window. Was it just me, or were there a lot more people out after dark than usual? And why did all of them seem to be staring at Josh's cruiser as we passed? Up ahead, A Riverdale's Chocolate Company truck was jackknifed across the road. It wasn't bad driving, I realized. Someone was trying to cut off our escape. Josh took the next right, only to find the narrow alley blocked by cars, with a crowd of dark figures waiting in front. Cursing, Officer Harper reversed, made a U-turn at the first street he saw. It seemed clear, until we noticed a cluster of people rolling a car into the middle of the street. Behind us, another group was doing the same. If their plan worked, we'd be trapped. Josh stepped on the gas, barely skidding around the vehicle ahead. One of the figures pushing it flew up to crash against the windshield, then slid off, leaving a gruesome black smear. Josh kept accelerating until we were home free. No one had screamed or even reacted to the speeding car. Behind us, the figure Josh had crashed into lurched upright, as though nothing had happened. Tiny white worms squirmed in the ooze it had left behind. With a shudder, Officer Harper turned on the windshield wipers. The highway ramp was up ahead. We took it. I knew right away where Josh was taking me. To a bus station near the city, about 30 minutes away. This town means everything to me. But I can't leave it like this. But I don't blame you if you want to get out of here, Officer Harper said as he dropped me off. I shook hands with my old classmate and walked toward the ticket window. I told the agent there that I wanted to get as far away as I could in a day. And I didn't care where to. She nodded like she'd heard that line before. I knew I should have been worrying about how I would live or the belongings that I had left behind. But all my energy was spent. I crumpled into my seat on the bus and fell asleep almost immediately. I must have been out for hours because when I awoke, it was nearly dawn. There was a crinkling and munching sound from the next seat over. The passenger beside me held out a piece of a familiar bar of candy. "Have you tried this stuff?" he offered. "It's delicious."
Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.